LGB. 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 LGB.
They say LGB everywhere I go. LGB. What it means, I don't know. LGB. Whatever it is. LGB. Come on, help me, please. Please.
Alrighty then.
I like you. LGB.
That's let's go, Brandon, right?
LGB.
This means let's go, Brandon.
No. LGB.
Sounds like let's go, Brandon, I guess.
LGB. All right. Let's go, Brandon.
I am Cornholio.
Chant LGB. Right wing and left wing. LGB. Go, you know the thing. LGB. If you don't sing that back. LGB. And you ain't black. LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
FJB. Let's go, Brandon.
I'm Joe Biden, and I forgot this.
Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels, joining you from Houston, Texas, this February 26th, 2024 at 9:11 a.m. Central Standard Time. And in my tradition of working smart and not hard, I'm going to be presenting to you Seth, Keshel, and Brian Cates while simultaneously recording audio for their Substacks. Before we get started with that, don't forget to go to epicthreads.tv/angelpaste. So actually it's epicthreads.tv/collections/angelpaste. But if you just go to epicthreads.tv, and I will of course show you the website for that. Epicthreads.tv is the Reading Epic Threads marketplace where you can get t-shirts, mugs, and more good stuff. Featured products recommended by Pat, that's me. Angel Paste Miracle Cream, Rose Angel Paste Sweet Orange pre-order. Angel Paste infused with organic sweet orange essential oil provides the vitamin C boost for your skin while engulfing you with the subtle aroma of fresh sweet oranges. Picked right from the orchard, this vitamin C infusion also means you shouldn't go sunbathing in it. That's a very important thing. When you put vitamin C on your skin, you need to wait for it to absorb before you go, outside. So it's one of those things you're going to want to put on either at night or just while you're indoors. Don't bake in the sun right after using this stuff. Please note this is a pre-order and will not ship until March 8th. We do expect to sell out of our ordered inventory on that. And don't forget, you can still also get the Rose Angel Paste while supplies last. Go to epicthreads.tv and keep an eye on that space because great stuff is coming to that website. Not even kidding. Your health will be significantly improved through epicthreads.tv. All right. From Seth, from skeshel.substack.com. 3 reasons Nikki Haley lingers. Topic: elections, by Captain Seth Keshel. Nikki Haley should receive an award from Ron DeSantis, or at least a Christmas card. Her continued presence in the 2024 Republican presidential nominating contest, which was over before it began, has directed all negative energy away from Florida's happily hidden governor and onto the same group of uniparty kingmakers, or is it queenmakers in this case, and manipulators who emulated Wile E. Coyote in leaving no stone unturned, trying to derail the Trump train in 2016's Republican primary. The mental gymnastics are particularly challenging with the Haley campaign. Her home state, South Carolina, was called before even a single vote was tabulated, with President Trump smoking her by more than 20 points. A blowout margin, even with an untold number of Democrats and left-leaning urbanite independents voting to dilute the margin and score moral victories, such as winning 3 of the state's 46 counties. Still, not even the mainstream media think Haley will win even a single state, especially now that New Hampshire and its litany of weird ideologies has come and gone, and so has South Carolina, where she was unable to clear 40%. This raises the question: Why is Nikki Haley still running? Seasoned cynics likely know the answer already, but should continue reading to the bottom of this piece to see where my head is at on the big picture. Haley's continued presence in a race with an outcome as certain as the morning sunrise presents a perfect learning point for the timeless principle of supply and demand. A primary race between one of the most successful presidents in modern American history and a run-of-the-mill governor and uniparty tool who won't drop out makes me think of a dinner party enjoying a 5-star steakhouse with a McDonald's representative standing outside the reserved dining room, asking people through every course to reconsider their choice in dining. After all, Haley's qualifications for the job appear to consist of 3 immutable points. 1, she's a woman. 2, she's not Donald Trump. 3, she's not Joe Biden. Her campaign promises, should they hypothetically lead her to the White House, would likely yield the following outcomes. 1, U.S. military involvement in Ukraine. 2, U.S. military involvement in one other country at minimum. 3, a perpetually porous southern border. 4, continued gradual decline of the U.S. manufacturing base and economy. 5, reprisal of the George W. Bush era of Republican leadership at minimum. Haley is the equivalent in the world of political offerings of a mom serving up a cup of scalding hot tea on Memorial Day at the water park when what is really needed is an ice cream cone the size of a football. So, why is she still here? Here are my top 3 reasons to explain as we near Super Tuesday her lingering national fart of a presidential campaign. 1, the uniparty can't ruin everyone at once. As I've immersed myself in this volatile geopolitical world, I've learned to become much less of a black and white thinker than I had been in years past, when staying in my lane was required of me so as not to disrupt an adjacent mission. I've come to believe that elections are made up of both real and fictitious ballots, which my analytical method has been able to identify all the way down to the precinct level by reading swings and trends. Likewise, I believe political campaigns are not only influenced by big money and shadowy figures, but by the candidate's own personal ambitions and drive for power. We all sat and watched as the months ticked by, as Ron DeSantis destroyed his own political career. He may recover some of his clout, but I see him a bit like Ted Cruz going forward, just not the same as he once was, not running against Trump, who is widely perceived as the rightful president and beloved by America's working class, was the right call. And had DeSantis not been lured by the siren song and waited his turn, he would have been a shoo-in for 2028. After finishing a distant second in the Iowa primary, the big donors who work against you and me consolidated to a single anti-Trump option, Haley. If we could take a time machine back to November 2022, when DeSantis was reelected by roughly the same margin Trump just took South Carolina's primary by, we would find DeSantis much more popular than Haley within the Republican political world. Haley has been selected for this, a final mission of political relevance. 2, disruption presence. Donald Trump is more likely to be the Republican Party nominee than Joe Biden is to be the Democrat nominee. And that is saying something, because I, unlike many others, do not sense a serious push to replace Biden, an assessment that hardens with each passing day. Primaries are intended for partisan voters to nominate candidates, and once they agree on said candidates, the party members are expected to rally around the candidate for the good of the party and, by extension, the good of the nation, presumably. Here is a top-level assessment of the GOP nominating contest so far, as I would tell it to a space alien landing on Earth for the first time today. A, Trump won a contested Iowa GOP caucus by the largest margin ever. B, Trump beat Haley in New Hampshire by double digits when she benefited from the votes of only 1/4 of registered Republicans in the state. C, Haley lost the official Nevada primary to None of the above by a 2-to-1 margin. D. Haley lost her home state by more than 20 points to Trump while soliciting as many Democrat and independent voters as possible. The fat lady has not only sung, but passed out, been transported to the hospital, and forcibly masked to prevent the spread of a virus that is most dangerous during election season. If by some machination of the Republican Party, Nikki Haley is the nominee in November, you can bet your bottom dollar on the worst GOP political outcome since Barry Goldwater's 1964 run against Lyndon B. Johnson. Haley, by stalling the inevitable conclusion of the Republican primary, is proving every single one of us so-called kooks, nuts, conspiracy theorists, radicals, and truthers right in confirming that not only is there an invisible hand controlling a political uniparty, but that those interests work in one accord to deprive Americans of their individual sovereignty. Haley, in staying in this race, diverts the news cycle away from an 8-month general election campaign and shortens it formally to perhaps 4 or 5 months, forcing Team Trump's messaging to address what many who are asleep at the wheel may perceive as a lively fight for the GOP nomination. You can see this with the messaging that came out of South Carolina. 40% of GOP voters don't want Trump. Should Haley choose to run as an independent candidate, her time is running out. Again, ballot access is a huge challenge for any candidates not running on a major party ticket, so I wouldn't spend a lot of energy worrying about her splitting the ticket. My unsolicited advice for Team Trump: begin your general election campaign now. Ignore Haley and let the lack of oxygen snuff her out completely. Expect Haley to pull a Kasich and endorse Biden and spend the next 8 months doing all she can to keep the uniparty in the White House. 3. Haley supports judicial corruption. This is not a close campaign. This is most certainly not Ford Reagan from 1976, nor is it McCain Bush from 2000. It's not even Romney Santorum from 2012. This campaign is so bad. Haley's comments are filled with nonstop trolling, and the big GOP money backers are backing away from the wreckage. Everyone knows the only prayer Haley has is for the corrupt 21st century American courts to derail Trump, something that is not only slow in happening, but blowing up in spectacular fashion. Securing the party's nomination over its most popular political figure in a generation by riding a wave of judicial corruption reeks of dishonor that must not be rewarded. Such ambition for staying in an unwinnable race is just as dishonorable as an eligible bachelor hoping the small-town hero doesn't come home from the war so his girl is free for the taking. There is no demand for Haley, and in every action she takes, she signals she is an approved uniparty candidate who intends to prioritize the interests of the global order over that of the American nation. For the first time in my adult life, I am confident in asserting I refuse to back any nominee hoisted to the top spot through judicial corruption. This nonsense ends when we say it does, and she can't win without us. And that was my friend Seth Keshel, one of the brilliant luminaries of statistical analysis and political commentary. The next one I will be doing is from, reminder, go to skeshel.substack.com, subscribe for money if you can. All right, the next one is going to be my friend Brian Cates. And this is from briancates.substack.com. Beware the wrath of a patient man. Con Inc. is going to spin what just happened furiously, but that's why I'm here. President Donald J. Trump, the man with the most extensive motorcade in America, and who sometimes even appears to have a man trailing him carrying the nuclear football, just got the Rana's scalp at last. But that's not how Conservative Inc. news media is going to cover what just happened. I've heard Con Inc. reporters insisting that the Rana was working for Donald J. Trump like she was his employee or something. Or they go with the talking point, Trump nominated her again. He was happy with the job she was doing. What an utter crap take. Now, it is true that Trump did nominate the Rana to be RNC chair for another term. He didn't bother to nominate someone else the last time there was a vote. Do you know why? Let me ask you something. Does Trump strike you as somebody who engages in useless actions, someone who's not interested in actually winning, but in making futile gestures like wasting his political capital and resources on tilting at windmills in a quixotic fashion? I get asked, why didn't Trump nominate somebody else to be the GOP chair? Why did he nominate the Rana for another term if he thought she was doing a bad job? Would you like me to explain to you why Trump didn't bother to nominate someone else for the uniparty GOP establishment's RNC chair? Why didn't he send forth a MAGA candidate to very publicly lose in humiliating fashion? The top of the RNC party leadership is currently under the complete control of the uniparty Rhino, Never Trump wing of the party. Always has been. Hey, you didn't know that or remember until I brought it up just now? Great. Now, focus. In an RNC leadership chock full of uniparty goons and Mitt Romney, John McCain, Beltway establishment machine sycophants, how many of the 111 or so voting RNC members would have endorsed Trump's MAGA, America First nominee over the Rana, had Trump actually been dumb enough to toss a sacrificial lamb into that never Trump-controlled ring? 5? 6. Would RNC uniparty Never Trumper votes for Trump's candidate have even made it into the double digits? Likely not. Do you think Donald Trump didn't know it was absolutely futile to nominate anybody but the vapid, duck-lipped, Never Trump GOP establishment person who'd already rigged the vote in her own favor? Of course he knew. As I said, Trump is not into useless, futile gestures, so he just went along with nominating the Never Trump Mitt Romney niece, who had a 0% chance of losing that vote, and he bided his time waiting for her to self-destruct. And self-destruct she did, at last. Now, I understand. I do. I fully understand why. Many of you either don't know or constantly forget that Donald J. Trump has been engaged in a hostile takeover of the GOP from the deeply entrenched and fortified uniparty establishment machine people who've been running it for decades before he came down that golden escalator and started making life exceedingly hard for them. You're still getting all your political analysis from Conservative Inc. media outlets, which is propaganda of the uniparty. You have been getting shit-level political analysis from people who have been determined to hide, obfuscate, and deny the obvious in their coverage of the current political landscape. What are the two most obvious things that happened over the last 6 years that the Conservative Inc. propagandists don't, can't, won't cover or discuss in all their endless reporting on the 2024 election? What two things do they stridently avoid talking about or covering that instantly render most of their excellent hot takes on current political events worthless? 1, that Donald J. Trump had won the 2020 election, and then it was brutally and blatantly stolen from him. And 2, that since 2018, Donald J. Trump has been running his own hand-picked slate of MAGA America First candidates in the GOP primaries, going directly against and head-to-head in blatant competition with the GOP uniparty establishment's slate of candidates. Also, Trump, since early 2021, has been starving the RNC of cash by exhorting the MAGA America First base to send their donations to him rather than the RNC. If you've been getting your news from Fox News, Red State, or any other Con Inc. propaganda sites working for the Uniparty, almost all of the news coverage of the elections you've been getting for years is slanted to hide and even outright deny the 2 points I just listed above. They start their shit-level analysis with the denial that Trump had the 2020 election stolen from him, and then on top of that, they compound that mistake by going on to claim that Trump is currently already in complete control of the RNC and is already pretty much running the GOP. So, of course, these propagandists are going to spin the fall of the Rana into some massive defeat for Donald Trump, and as his hand-picked RNC chair has to step down. But what really just happened is that Trump is getting stronger. The Rana made promises to the Uniparty Never Trump RNC leadership that she would successfully prevent his triumphant return, and then took steps to stop him. And she failed. She failed to stop him. And now, after Trump's massive and historic South Carolina victory over neocon Nikki, the writing is on the wall. The bill came due. Trump wins again. The Rana's scalp is now riding on his belt. 'Tis glorious. That was my friend Brian Cates, the absolute brilliant scion of this community, or one might say progenitor of this community. Back in the day, Brian was the one writing the threads on Twitter that I made my channel surrounded by, of course, Thomas Wichter being the number one, and then Brian Cates the second most often. Yep. There was a thing called a thread on Twitter, but now that Twitter has a no character limit anymore, nobody writes threads anymore. So I read Substack articles instead, but I still call them threads. All right. What do you say we do another one from Brian Cates? Hello, Trump, Russia collusion hoax, my old friend. How I've missed you. So glad you're back. By Brian Cates. This is not your imagination playing a trick on you over the past week. Those institutions that are determined to stop President Donald J. Trump's return to the White House are being forced to roll out the Trump Russia collusion hoax again. The rogue intelligence agencies, corrupt members of the U.S. Congress, and, of course, the fake news media have had a busy week as they attempt to execute the playbook known for a blatant resurrection of the Hunter Biden scandal is Russian disinformation hoax. From Business Insider, exclusive Russia-linked smear campaign against Hunter Biden began earlier than previously thought by Matthias Schwartz. A former KGB agent gave disinformation about Hunter Biden to an aide for Mike Pompeo in May 2019. The agent also presented the same disinformation to Justice Department officials in January 2019. It's been hysterically funny for me for the past week, watching them all desperately and frantically trying to play make-believe and let's pretend as they act like that hoax wasn't debunked up the wazoo already. They're being forced to run a play out of their playbook that everybody already knows is fake. From Ken Delanian on Twitter, new former U.S. spies warned in 2020 that the Hunter Biden scandal had Russian fingerprints. They feel vindicated now. From Michael Tracy, amazingly, this question is asked like the Mueller report never happened, and there weren't endless, harried efforts to dig up anything that could implicate Trump financially with Russia. Down the memory hole it goes. They want everyone stuck in a perpetual 2016 propaganda vortex. From Stephen Miller, hot news scoop from Andrea Mitchell. Hunter's laptop and its thousands of incriminating photos and emails were secretly planted in a Delaware repair shop by Vladimir Putin. Sources also tell Miller that D.B. Cooper is living in Russia, where he is building a Stargate for the FSB. Stephen Miller is right. At this point, all we can do is just ruthlessly mock these desperate idiots. When that particular trick play in your dirty trick playbook was already run earlier in the game, and the defense is now ready for it and is not about to fall for it again, assuming they fell for it the first time. How dumb a move is it to make it obvious you are attempting to run that very same play again, even though the other team is itching to stop it now? That's how bad of a position Trump's enemies now find themselves in on the board. Trying to run that play again is not a winning position. It smacks of desperation. This is the kind of rear guard stalling tactic you do to avoid the checkmate. Their power is broken. Not just their narrative power, but their ability to shape and control events. If they still had their full power, if their staff wasn't broken, Trump's gone long ago. Not only is Trump still here, but he's gaining momentum in the polls as Biden is manifestly fading and once again preparing to not campaign in the fall. Headline: 2024 general election, Trump versus Biden. RCP average, Trump up 1.9. Various polls: Trump up 4, Trump up 1, Trump up 4, Biden up 4, Trump up 6, Trump up 1, Trump up 2, Trump up 2, Trump up 1, Trump up 4. You can fully expect Trump to continue building his political momentum over the summer as those who are attempting to bankrupt his campaign and maybe even convict him of a felony crime before the election keep highlighting their own manifest and blatant corruption when they're not hitting themselves in the face with a boomerang. As I've been saying, had the script been written 2 years ago, starting with the raid on Mar-a-Lago by Trump's enemies, been executed as written, the former president would have been reduced to the political equivalent of a bubbling pool of toxic waste by now. As you can see, if you look around, the script that was written to utterly destroy Trump and remove him from the picture and teach the American people that there is no hope, they shall never escape the soft tyranny of their ruling class, is never being followed again. Much to the rising horror of the ruling class, a far different script is unfolding, one they have no control over and appear powerless to stop. I know that some, when faced with the choice of the red pill or the blue pill, opt for the black pill and insist, whatever it looks like now, Trump is doomed, and so are we, because there's simply no way they will let Trump win this coming election. I reject that, because I don't think the panic we're seeing in certain quarters is being faked. The polls have been pretty consistently close to the actual outcomes thus far, despite the Haley campaign openly courting Democrat crossover voters to skew the results as much as possible. Recall, as you look at the current polling, one of the biggest tells that the steal of the 2020 election was coming was all the polls showing Biden winning handily over Trump. It made the gaslighting job following the rigged election much easier to do. That's not how 2024 is playing out. We're at the tail end of February, and Biden is dropping behind during the prospect of a rematch with Trump. Trump looks stronger and stronger as the days tick by, and Biden looks weaker and weaker. As we all know, Biden couldn't campaign much in 2020, mostly stuck to his basement, and only emerged for a few key rallies. He's in worse condition now than he was 3.5 years ago, that he won't be campaigning this time either. If they are going to try to rig this 2024 election and steal it again for Joe Biden, I wish them the best of luck. After having Biden as the nominal president for the past 3 years, this country is in a very different place from where it was in the fall of 2020. It has to be close enough to steal, and they'd have to be able to successfully gaslight the country into once again accepting the fraudulent results. I don't see either of those things happening. And remember, these ass clowns are not currently having to push a Russia hoax that's already been debunked because they're winning. They're being forced to do this because they're losing, and losing badly. Once again, that is my friend Brian Cates, another one of his barn burner pieces. Go to briancates.substack.com, and don't forget, do a subscription. They're free, or you could do a paid subscription if you have the means. Remember, we do these things for a living. It's how we make our money. Your help is always appreciated. And also, don't forget, Angel Paste. You can pre-order the Sweet Orange Vitamin C packed essential oil infused Angel Paste. Make sure not to go out in the sun for a little while after you put it on. It has a magnifying effect on the sun. Anyway, next, Naomi Wolf. From NaomiWolf.com. Substack.com. Letter from CPAC. Journey into a new kind of dissidence. By Dr. Naomi Wolf. Forgive my recent silence. I've been occupied with the presentation by Maine State Representative Heidi Sampson of our Clean Elections Bill to the Legislative Council. This took place last Thursday, and it would have been the first step in the journey of the bill from draft bill to law in that state had the council voted to endorse it. Instead, after a spirited presentation of the bill by Representative Sampson, the council voted, incredibly enough, not to endorse it, meaning our Clean Elections Bill, which would, recall, ensure paper ballots, same-day voting, voter ID, no ballot harvesting, proactive requests for absentee ballots, the ouster of NGOs from the voting process, same-day voting, and public counting, is now dead in Maine. The vote tally was shocking. A straight party line vote. Democrats 6 opposed to Republicans 4 supporting. I am stunned that any elected official in America wanted to go on the record as having stood between a voter in Maine and his or her vote being counted accurately, but 6 have done so. Mortifyingly, all Democrats. This has really happened. I have felt that this bill's journey in every state will illuminate who and what is standing against clean elections. It does have the side effect of smoking out enemies of ethical voting practices and revealing their motivations. The fight to pass this bill in Maine is not over. Representative Sampson is termed out, meaning she cannot run again, but she is handing the bill to a successor for the next legislative session. We will keep eyes and voter pressure on Maine. I have to believe that voters of every party in Maine want their votes counted accurately. Brian and I then flew this past week to CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, organized by CPAC Chairman Matt Schlapp and usually hosted 3 times a year at the kind invitation of Steve Bannon's War Room's production team. When we reached the Gaylord Hotel in National Harbor, Maryland, a fairly recently developed part of the shore alongside the Potomac opposite Alexandria, I felt a bit disoriented. National Harbor looked like Disneyland, walkable city streets lined with slick restaurants and themed bars aimed at conventioneers and tourists, but with none of the grit or eccentricity of a real city. A massive blue illuminated Ferris wheel spun slowly at the edge of the dark, slow-moving water. We entered the Gaylord at the peak of CPAC to an atrium thronged with happy visitors. My first ignominious reaction to the scene, for which Brian rightly chided me, was, "This is not my culture." There was a buzz from the moment we entered, a joyful vibe. After we checked in, changed, and ran down to join the festivities, we were struck by how pleasant and positive almost everyone was to us and to each other. As someone reported to me, the desk clerk had said, "I know they won't approve of me saying this back in Southeast DC, where I come from, but you all are nice." Many attendees wore bright colors, the men in white or chino slacks, and what looked to me like golf shirts, or were more formally dressed in dark blue suits with ties and white shirts. Many of the women wore dresses, solid-colored blocks of orange, white, or dresses of deep red or patriotic blue. A number of women had long, wavy, flowing locks or extensions and wore nude or beige, very high heels. I sort of respected this fashion, since it seemed as if it intended to sport a defiant femininity in an era of what is a woman and Maoist fashions for women outside of that subculture. The center of the hotel is a vast glass atrium with a wall of glass overlooking the harbor. It is an updated version of the hotels that had been trendy when I was a teen in the 1970s, with glass elevators and atriums, the steamy scent of plants overhanging the balconies, and artificial waterways separating bars from cafes on the ground level. The Gaylord Hotel was a chicer, fresh version of that style, with 2 entire colonial-style houses that were actually shops, enclosed by the atrium on the ground level. But it aimed for that same visual impact for the out-of-towners. You could live for 3 days Without leaving the resort, a market offered coffee and breakfast wraps and poke bowls and comfortable chairs. A steakhouse for later in the day provided old-fashioned martinis, and the centerpiece of it all was the 2 levels of ballrooms showcasing CPAC stages. The first night, Brian and I joined A.J. Rice and Drew Allen, 2 men who represent canceled voices or alternative and conservative voices as publicists at Rice's PubliusPR.com. The men represent politician Carrie Lake. Cheated, she argues, of her victory as governor of Arizona by 35,000 unaccounted votes. Economist Peter Navarro, recently sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress. Harvard lawyer Alan Dershowitz, canceled, he maintains, by the left since he defended President Trump, and had been representing Tulsi Gabbard, who left the Democratic Party after arguing that it had become an oligarchy and racist. Disclosure, Publius PR are also my publicists. We met Drew and AJ's friends at the steakhouse. These included Jason Shepard, founder of Wimkin.com, a censorship-free social media site. He described the obstacles, including being targeted with harassment, that he endured as he sought to protect free speech for the users on his platform. I listened to the young men describe the battles they fought daily. I thought about AJ and Drew connecting innumerable influencers' voices, including those of silenced authors and marginalized candidates via dozens of platforms, many of them new ones, to millions of audience members. I mused about Wimkin's millions of visits. I considered their colleague, Gray Delaney, my publisher at All Seasons Press, who would arrive the next day, and his fight to publish suppressed voices. These were men in their 30s or early 40s, leading a new generation altogether, with brushed or spiked haircuts, dark jackets, t-shirts and jeans, and leather sneakers. They were not like the dinosaurs of my generation and older who were running legacy culture, tech, and PR. These were not the establishment. All of these new leaders had enterprises that were punching culturally above their weight, in the sense that all of their enterprises were startups or are tightly staffed. They are not funded by huge PR or publishing or tech conglomerates. I had just finished reading In All His Glory, The Life and Times of William S. Paley and the Birth of Modern Broadcasting, and I felt I was seeing a modern version of what the book describes as the emergence of the networks of radio in the 1930s and 40s, and then of television in the 1950s. Paley, too, in his day, had been a brash young man with a vision and only a handful of outlets when radio was new. I felt, in listening to the young men plan and joke and analyze and argue, as if I was looking at the future of what will someday be perhaps 1/2 of America's culture and communications. They spoke with focus and planned their strategies even as the drinks continued to arrive. I was seeing, I realized, one of the nodes of a new America in the making, a new set of related cultural and telecommunications nerve centers being incubated, developed, and extended by talented, stubborn young men who simply would not go along with censorship or with the othering of ideas. They had the ferocity of young men expressed in a new way, in a new generation, but I heard also something familiar and timeless. There was a color and sound in that ferocity that I recognized from my travels to police states around the world. It was the color and sound of dissidents, in a community of dissidents, in an actual, not a metaphorical, cultural war. The next morning, Brian and I visited CPAC proper. The war room set there was a dynamic stage to the left of the entrance to CPAC's auditorium. Live interviews streamed from the set continually, and Bannon, Natalie Winters, his co-host, and their guests were broadcasting. For many in the crowd that thronged the set, it was clearly fascinating to see the same personalities that they followed digitally in real life and in real time. I had the pleasure of joining Bannon and Winters on stage briefly and updating the crowd on the status of the vaccine wars and on our bill's defeat in Maine. I was gratified by a warm welcome from the posse and delighted to learn that it was Winter's birthday. Though the right is represented by legacy media as sexist, I am often struck by the fact that in his advancing the work of 23-year-old Natalie Winters, one of the best reporters working, the 23-year-old reporter Jane Zirkle, CFO COO of War Room Grace Chong, and War Room CEO and Army veteran Captain Maureen Bannon is investing in and showcasing the work of some of the brightest young women intellectuals, reporters, commentators, and business leaders of their generations. In fact, I can't think of another major media outlet that has a mostly female C-suite leadership team, let alone one made up of relatively young women. When I considered the influential roles of all of these women and saw them at work together on the Death Star unstoppable media machine that is War Room, I had another moment in which I realized that the stereotypes of those on the right are often belied by the realities on the ground. In the afternoon, we were taken down Media Row to do interviews. I spoke with Frank Gaffney on his show, Securing America. I had almost refused to speak with him a couple of years ago when we first were connected as organizations I then respected, such as the Southern Poverty Law Center, called him paranoid and wild-eyed in his concern about radical Islam. Gaffney, along with his equally fearless colleague Reggie Littlejohn of the Sovereignty Coalition, are now among our favorite friends. I don't always agree with Gaffney or with Littlejohn, but one of the joys of the community in which I surprisingly find myself is that people can have strong friendships, respect for one another, while sustaining disagreements. I met Mike Lindell, who is, again, caricatured by the press I used to read as being a raving fantasist in his concerns about compromised elections. I shared my news about our election integrity bill with him and heard about his exciting approach of calling for paper ballots district by district. I thanked him for doing the work he had done to identify the corruption of voting machines. Though he has paid a heavy price for bringing this issue to light, it is one of greatest importance. As readers of this Substack know from my essay, How Voting Machines Cheat and What to Do About This, I, also prompted by his and others' warnings, looked into the issue of whether voting machines are secure, including asking my own totally nonpartisan developer. I learned that they are so easy to compromise that I concluded that we can't know who has won an election since about 2005, when they were introduced. I was interviewed by Lou Dobbs, who had been forced out of Fox News after an onerous lawsuit against him and the network by a Venezuelan businessman. Again, the issue he had raised that led to the lawsuit was about voting machines. Kevin McKernan, the CSO and founder of Medicinal Genomics, had sat down earlier that morning at a table where we were having breakfast. He is the scientist who recently found that DNA fragments and plasmids contaminate both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. He has been traveling to Congress and addressing bodies worldwide, explaining the seriousness of his discovery. A quietly witty, very pleasant man with a low-key style, McKernan had welcomed Brian and me twice into his lab in Beverly, Massachusetts, to video record what he had discovered. First, the corruption of the COVID PCR tests, and more recently, the DNA contamination of the mRNA vaccines. McKernan's understated manner belies the immense importance of his findings and his current role in the world. Edward Dowd, former BlackRock hedge fund manager, founder of Finance, P-H-I-N-A-N-C-E Technologies, and author of Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 2022, the man who alerted the world to millions of excess deaths and disabilities from the mRNA injection, a tall, sandy-haired man with a manner as understated and quietly witty as McKernan's, had also stopped by. I thought of how some of the people doing the most important and heroic work of all, work that is changing the outcomes of history, have the least egotistical manners of all. Later that day, in the same era, I met again the incredible, charismatic German member of the European Parliament, Christine Anderson, and her colleagues. She is a striking woman, tall and dark-haired, who walks as if the currents of history are flowing around her. She wears distinctive tailored suits in lemon yellow or deep maroon. That afternoon, as we sat in the atrium for coffee, she wore a beautifully made brown damask skirted suit with a bronze silk blouse beneath it tied with a foulard, and black kitten-heeled suede shoes with straps as if from the 1920s. If she did not exist as a character, as well as a leader, history would have had to invent her. MEP Anderson and her party, Alternative for Germany, now represent about 22% of Germans. MEP Anderson's party are being called Nazis by the legacy media in Germany, yet she perseveres. Coverage of CPAC in our own legacy media, NBC in this case, identified attendees as Nazis, smearing the event by association, though I neither saw nor heard anything remotely of this kind. MEP Anderson confirmed to me that the narrative, the vaccine narrative, the globalist narrative, the digital ID narrative is crumbling in Europe. She described a Europe riven by mass, unchecked immigration as our southern border now is, if not even worse. And she described leaders all around the world waking up to what is happening globally, presenting resistance. As Anderson described the undoing and the regrouping of Europe, the steel blue Potomac flowed before us. A little wintry light blue sky showed through what had been gray-white cloud cover. One of the oldest cities in America, Alexandria, Virginia, was visible on the far shore. As Anderson spoke about her country and mine, I felt the weight of the centuries that preceded us, the long fight up through the 18th century for the Enlightenment, which was now at risk of being altogether lost, the 20th century's bloody fight against fascism, and now this. We are living in an interesting time, she remarked, with that very slight edge of irony that is her hallmark. And what we both did not add out loud, I felt was something that we may have both agreed silently. In some ways, we are privileged to live in this time and to be warriors with others similarly battling around the world in this fight. Late the next day, we visited with commentator Emerald Robinson and her husband, poet and critic Garrick Davis, Cameron Wallace, Bannon's producer, Claire Dooley, the talented CHD filmmaker Ed Dowd, and actress podcaster Sophia Karstens. Robinson, in addition to being one of our era's great beauties, is also a savagely intelligent analyst of the current scene. She, too, has been a martyr to an environment in which questions are no longer allowed. Robinson is a former White House correspondent for Fox News, who was fired by her employer and banned by Twitter after she tweeted, reportedly, that the mRNA vaccines contained luciferase. The Wrap.com ran a smear piece asserting that the luciferase issue raised by the disgraced reporter was an example of satanical, sick, conspiracy theories. In fact, Robinson's questions were not unreasonable. While it may not be in the Moderna mRNA vaccine, luciferase is a real thing, and it is indeed being widely studied as a biosensor marker in virology, as well as having been studied for some SARS-CoV-2 vaccine development. As, quote, luciferase-based biosensors in the era of the COVID-19 pandemic, a paper concludes, quote, collectively, these data demonstrate the utility of bioluminescent biosensors for interrogating various aspects of virology. Their respective ease of construction and validation makes bioluminescent biosensors a ready tool for application to urgent problems, including the present SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, end quote. Texas Medical Center's scientists collaborated with COVID vaccine developers by using luciferase. Quote, not only does the enhanced brightness provided by luciferase decrease turnaround time for a diagnosis, but it also helps speed up the process of vaccine development. Quote, for vaccine studies, you need to find out how much of a response somebody has to a potential vaccine. So instead of the traditional way, which could take days, we can get results in 4 hours after infection, end quote. And here is the FDA now offering luciferase as a biosensor assay to track RSV. And here again is an NIH database paper, In Vivo Bioluminescence for Tracking Cell Fate and Function, explaining how luciferase can be used to track biological processes in vivo. So, while Robinson may not have been completely right in her concern about where luciferase was currently being used. She was completely right in raising the alarm about it, as both vaccine and virology developments are focused on luciferase's abilities to track biological processes within mammals. This, of course, can have all kinds of alarming socio-political applications. Let us not forget the huge push we all recently barely survived for vaccine passports. Luciferase can, and was, being tested to allow a look inside, in effect, a mammalian body. Reporters know that sometimes their initial hypotheses are not completely right. In a normal democracy, they're supposed to persevere and to keep questioning. Indeed, this kind of iterative questioning is exactly what reporters are supposed to do. But Robinson, too, had her life turned upside down by doing exactly what reporters are supposed to do. Nevertheless, she perseveres. I am not naming the leaders above, whom we met or with whom we spoke at CPAC and near the Global COVID Summit as an exercise in name dropping. Rather, I'm trying to give you the sense I had that in attending CPAC and in being near the Global COVID Summit, I was witnessing a vortex of history in the making. Here is where all of these great figures convened or passed by. I feel that someday this sweeping, overstated, corporate decorated Marriott might be remembered, as are some of the inns and churches and institutes and gathering places that birthed the abolitionist movement. In the early days of the abolitionist movement, a handful of stubborn, dogged men and women who were relatively poor or without many resources and who were continually being told that they were insane, dangerous, and threatening to society, kept insisting, in spite of continual harassment and loss of status, friends, and income, on their belief that all men and women of whatever race were brothers and sisters, and that slavery, as deeply entrenched as any institutional evil in their society, could indeed, with God's help and their own hard work and courage, someday be defeated. Perhaps in 1860 in the Great Hall in New York's Cooper Union, when Abraham Lincoln gave a stirring speech to denounce slavery, or in one of the other gathering places of that marginalized, hated, and derided freedom movement at that time, people felt as I did this past weekend in National Harbor. I felt a sense of astonishment that a great evil force had sought to destroy us all, to destroy sovereignty, democracy, representational government, bodily integrity, science, journalism, religion, and that these individuals, all at great cost to themselves, and then others, and others, and others, upon hearing them, had all said no. And I thought that out of those first tens and then thousands and now millions of voices saying no, something new, something powerful, a great rebirthing was in the making. Tomorrow, I will describe the last day of CPAC, but for today, I want to give you a taste of what I felt after these exhausting, exhilarating few days. One conclusion I reached was that it was odd and notable that so many people who were leaders in the freedom field and who attended events at the Gaylord Hotel may or may not have been Republican or MAGA. In regards to many of the people I have mentioned above, I have no idea the politics they hold. But what was clear to me was that CPAC cherished many people who cherish freedom, whatever their secondary political views might be. And I felt that it was sad and important that all of these freedom-oriented leaders were not being convened at the DNC or at the Southern Poverty Law Center or by the ACLU, or were not being celebrated at Burning Man or hosted in whatever the left-wing equivalent of CPAC, there really isn't any, but you take my point, might be. The left is not engaging these fierce warriors for truth and freedom, from what I see, at all. I want to leave you today with the sense I had in the midst of one of the CPAC days of what time it is and where I stood. We were waiting for President Trump to appear. We were in a vast auditorium, ballroom, and the soundtrack was booming. People of all races from many countries were in the crowd. I was seated in the media section among my former colleagues who were silently, sourly taking notes. An ABBA song rang out, and then Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire. A lovely young girl of about 19 with a ponytail and a black swirly skirt, and a handsome young man about her own age in a button-down vest and jeans suddenly got up from where they'd been sitting in the bleachers. With exuberant good spirits, they began to do a fantastically skilled swing dance. The young man spun the young lady and twirled her. He leaned her back, and she kicked her foot in the air. The crowd of older, more jaded people could not help themselves and burst into spontaneous applause. I reflected on the young people I had met at CPAC, who were determined to find husbands and wives, whatever orientation they may be. There were gay men and lesbians there too, and have children, and to raise good, healthy families. I thought of how the young people I had met who were trying to find something other and better than the moral chaos they saw on TikTok, and a world of porn and violent hip-hop and of cannabis stores on every other block, and a menu of depression, SSRIs, and nihilism on offer to the young, were rejecting all of that by being here and aligning with these other values. I thought of how the trad moms I had met were moving heaven and earth to homeschool their own kids so that the children could grow up not indoctrinated and not sexualized too young or transitioned while they were not old enough to vote or fight in a war. I thought of the elders I had met who were just trying to clean up the voter rolls in their neighborhoods in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. And I thought of the genial member of Priests for Life I had met, Father Pavoni, who spoke about not judging women who had abortions, but offering women with unwanted pregnancies love and options in a culture of death. As I looked at the spinning, exuberant, innocently joyful young people, I realized in a flash, this is the revolution. This was not the moral majority of my father's era. Rather, this was a subversive, courageous subculture that was resisting the dominant narrative and the morass of darkness that is our dominant cultural moment. These, I realized with a start, are the dissidents. This is the counterculture. And that is the exceedingly brilliant Naomi Wolf. Find her at naomiwolf.substack.com. The moment that follow-up piece about the final day of CPAC comes out, I will be presenting it here on Reading Epic Threads. Go to naomiwolf.substack.com. Do a subscription for her as quick as you can. If you have the means, do a paid subscription. She's also the CEO of dailyclout.io. Check that place out as well. I'm also going to check out this Wimkin social media site, 100% uncensored social media, wimkin.com. I'll check that out as well. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Support us by going to epicthreads.tv. That's right, epicthreads.tv. And you can, find it. That's the home of Angel Paste, et cetera, et cetera. Just get your stuff, dudes. It's freaking awesome. Angel Paste now has the available for pre-order Sweet Orange Infused. So definitely check that out. And let's pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.